An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There are two ways to get lost. One is to walk for a long time without knowing where you're going. The other is to find yourself in a place that was built, from the very beginning, to make sure you never get out. The Labyrinth of Crete was the second kind. It wasn't a long road or a dark forest. It was a trap shaped like a building, designed by a brilliant mind to disorient anyone who stepped inside. Its corridors led nowhere useful. Its turns brought you back to where you started without you even realizing it. And at its center lived something no one wanted to find. This is the story of Theseus, the labyrinth, and the thread that changed everything. To understand why Theseus sailed to Crete, you first need to understand the weight Athens was carrying. Athens was a proud, busy city, full of people who built things, sailed the seas, and debated ideas under the same blue Mediterranean sky. But there was a debt they couldn't ignore. Years earlier, after a conflict with Crete, the Athenians had been forced into a condition that hurt every time it came due. At regular intervals, they had to send a group of young people to the island of Crete. 14 in total, 7 boys and 7 girls, chosen from their families. They weren't going to work or to study. They were going into the labyrinth. And from the labyrinth, as everyone who knew anything about it would tell you, no one ever came back. King Minos ruled Crete with an authority no one in the Aegean Sea dared to challenge. His island was wealthy, his fleet was powerful, and his word was law. But deep inside his palace, in its lowest levels, there was a secret that Minos preferred to keep hidden while also using it as a symbol of his power. That secret was the Minotaur, a creature born from circumstances the gods themselves had set in motion, with the body of a man and the head of a bull, locked away in a place it had never left, and from which, as everyone agreed, no one who entered ever returned. The labyrinth had been built by Daedalus, the most extraordinary inventor of his time. Daedalus was no ordinary architect. He was someone who could imagine what others thought impossible, and then build it with his own hands. The labyrinth he designed for Minos had no visible logic. Its corridors branched off without reason. Its turns brought you back to the same spot. And its chambers looked so alike that any attempt to memorize the route was useless. You could walk in with your full attention, count every step, notice every detail, and still end up completely lost. Getting in was easy. Getting out was something else entirely. In Athens, when the time for the tribute came around, the whole city felt it like an open wound. The young people were chosen, their families said goodbye, and the ship set sail with black sails, the sign that this voyage carried no hope. Theseus was the son of King Aegeus of Athens, though he had grown up far from the city and had only recently arrived to take his place there. He was young, strong, and resolute, with the kind of determination that isn't learned, but carried from within. When the moment came to choose the young people for the tribute, Theseus made a decision that surprised everyone. He would go, not because he had been chosen, but because he chose to go himself. His father tried to talk him out of it. Aegeus was a man who had already lost too much, and couldn't bear the thought of losing his son in the depths of a foreign island. But Theseus had an argument Aegeus couldn't fully dismiss. Someone had to try. If there was a way to end this tribute, it had to be found from the inside. He promised his father that if he made it back alive, he would swap the black sails for white ones before the ship reached port. That signal would tell Aegeus from a distance that his son was coming home. Aegeus agreed, holding on to that promise the way you hold on to a rope over a drop. The ship arrived in Crete, and the young Athenians were received at the palace of Minos. It was there, in the middle of that tense and closely watched reception, that Theseus caught the eye of Ariadne. Ariadne was the daughter of Minos, an intelligent young woman who knew the secrets of the palace better than anyone. She had grown up near the Labyrinth, had heard its stories since childhood, and understood exactly what it meant to walk in without a guide. When she looked at Theseus, she also saw his resolve, and she decided to help him, even if that meant acting in secret against her own father's plans. What Ariadne gave Theseus was not a weapon or a map. It was something far simpler and far more powerful, a ball of thread. The idea was as clear as it was effective. Theseus would tie one end of the thread at the entrance to the labyrinth and let it out as he went. No matter how many turns he took, how many corridors he walked, how many forks he came across, the thread would be there, trailing behind him, keeping him connected to the way out. All he had to do was follow it back. Ariadne's brilliance wasn't in physical strength or in knowing the labyrinth's layout. It was in understanding that when everything around you is designed to confuse, sometimes all you need is something that keeps you connected to where you started. The night before the young people were sent in, Theseus received the ball of thread in secret from Ariadne's hands, in the dim light of a palace corridor. They didn't exchange many words. There was no need. The next morning, when the doors of the labyrinth opened, Theseus tied the thread firmly to the frame of the entrance, checked the knot one more time with his fingers, and walked inside. The labyrinth was exactly what the stories described. The corridors were tall and stone, lit by faint light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. The air inside was different from the air outside, stiller, closer, with the particular silence of a place where nothing lives except something that prefers the dark. Theseus moved carefully, without rushing, paying attention to every turn. Right, left, straight ahead, right again. At one point he thought he recognized a wall he had already passed, but the thread unspooling behind him reminded him he was still moving forward. There was no way to fool himself as long as the thread was in his hand. He kept going. The center of the labyrinth didn't announce itself. One moment, Theseus was in a corridor that looked like all the others, and then the space opened up into a larger chamber. And there was the Minotaur. It was enormous. Not in the way an animal is enormous, but in the way something is when it combines the most imposing parts of two different forms: the broad shoulders and arms of a full-grown man, the heavy head and horns of a bull. It had lived in that place its entire life, without ever having asked to exist or chosen that fate. There was something about its presence that felt both threatening and strangely solitary, as if the labyrinth wasn't just its prison, but the only world it had ever known. But in that moment, what mattered was that it stood in front of Theseus, and it had no intention of stepping aside. The confrontation was real, and it was dangerous. Theseus had no advantage in size or raw strength. What he had was agility, resolve, and the clear understanding that this was the moment he had traveled from Athens for. He used the space in the chamber, dodged the Minotaur's charges, waited for the right instant, and found his opening. It wasn't quick or easy. It was the kind of effort that leaves your breathing ragged and your arms heavy. But when the creature fell, the labyrinth went quiet again. A different kind of quiet than before. Freer. Then Theseus looked for the thread. It was right where he had left it. Thin, unbroken, stretched across the floor through every corridor he had walked. He began following it without slowing down. Right, left, straight, right again, but now in reverse. Every length of thread was one less stretch of labyrinth. The air shifted little by little, less closed in, carrying a different smell. And before he had time to fully prepare himself for the moment, light appeared ahead of him. He walked out. Behind him lay Daedalus's labyrinth, the creature that had lived inside it, and an obligation Athens had carried for years. Ahead were the sea, the ship, and the way home. Ariadne came out with him. They had promised to leave together, and Theseus kept that part of his word. What happened next on the voyage home belongs to another story, a more complicated and sadder one. But there is something worth mentioning before this one closes. The ship sailed back toward Athens, with Theseus on board, alive, victorious, his mind still full of the labyrinth and everything that had happened inside it. And in that state, with so much to think about, Theseus forgot something small but decisive: changing the sails. The black sails stayed up on the mast, just as they had been when the ship left. Aegeus, his father, was waiting on the shore, watching the horizon. When he saw the ship coming in with black sails, he believed what those sails had always meant. The tragedy that followed wasn't part of the labyrinth, but it was part of the same story. The one about what happens when you forget a promised signal. Some labyrinths are built from stone. Others are built from decisions we make without thinking them all the way through. Theseus found his way out of the first one thanks to a thread, his own courage, and the help of someone who trusted him when she had every reason not to. For the second, there was no thread to guide him, because that kind of thread you have to hold yourself, and the only way not to lose it is to never let it go.